There will now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Please be seated. Honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, there's an echo in the chamber. I want to ask Sound and Vision to attend to that problem. But honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, our guests in the gallery, let me firstly apologize for this late start, unfortunate late start. It is due to a problem that was experienced with the braille printer for the honorable minister's speech. I now request the secretary to read the order.
Debate on vote number 18, Correctional Services Appropriation Bill.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Correctional Services will introduce his debate. The Honourable Minister.
Honourable Chairperson, Deputy Minister Thabang Makwetla, Deputy Minister John Jeffrey, colleagues from both sides of the House, our dear special guests, it gives me great pleasure to once again come before you to introduce the debate on this financial year's budget vote on corrections. The Department of Correctional Services plays an important role in the criminal justice value chain in South Africa. As part of the JCPS cluster and the value chain, the citizens of this country must never doubt our ability of building a South Africa where all people would enjoy quality life in a safe and a secure environment. The annual performance plan which was adopted by the Portfolio Committee earlier this week and encapsulates the department's predetermined objectives of the 2017-18 financial year, as well as the performance targets we have set in order to deliver on our mandate, constitute the framework within which this budget is articulated. We take leverage from the National Development Plan, which compels government to build a just, fair, prosperous, and equitable society that everyone can proudly call home. It is for this reason that our programs are structured to transform individuals to live our centers as change agents and not just as changed persons. The budget allocation for 2017-18 financial year is 22.8 billion rands, aligned to effect the implementation of our programs. In November 2015, I established a task team to drive the review of our parole system. I'll be reporting to the members of Parliament today that a draft position paper has been finalized in this regard. Key to note is that consultations are continuing, and we shall keep members of the public updated in this regard as well. Various pieces of legislation impacting on the parole system, including Correctional Services, the Correctional Services Act, and the Criminal Procedure Act, are being reviewed in this regard. Once all necessary processes have been finalized, we will approach Cabinet and Parliament with draft legislation to effect implementation of the position paper. Key to our capacity to deliver on our core mandate is adequate infrastructure, which must be in a proper state of repair. Nationally, our overcrowding situation stands at 137% and varies from center to center depending on a number of factors, including the size and location of the center concerned. Plans are in place to introduce measures that would reduce overcrowding by way of relocating offenders from overcrowded to less overcrowded centers, whilst effecting necessary and urgent infrastructural improvements and necessary expansion to realize more bed space in response to an ever-rising need. A continued increase in offender population has presented unavoidable challenges of overcrowding in our correctional facilities over the years and the concomitant implications arising thereof. A case brought by Sonke Gender Justice in December 2016, for example, on overcrowding in Polsmoor, has again highlighted the problems that overcrowding creates towards ensuring safe custody premised on humane conditions. We need to highlight that we have reduced overcrowding in Polsmoor to at least 157%, much closer to what is required under the order of court of the Western Cape High Court of 150%, which we must have reached by the end of next month. We are pleased that shorter term sentences keep on decreasing. However, we're concerned that long-term sentences are, on the other hand, on the rise. In the past 13 years, that is 2003 to 2016, for example, sentences between 6 and 12 months decreased by 51%, and those between 12 to 24 months plummeted by 71%. What is even more worrying is that sentences between 10 and 15 years increased by 77%. The number of offenders sentenced to 20 years and above increased by a staggering 439%, whilst lifers grew by 413%. That is, offenders who are sentenced to life imprisonment. This says that we are increasingly becoming a violent society, and this is a matter that should concern all of us, and we must begin to look at the underlying root causes collectively as a nation in order to address them. Looking at these figures, there is an urgent need to create additional bed space and take extra levels of care over our existing infrastructure, which is dilapidating due to limited maintenance and the overload on the system because of overcrowding. Utilization of offender labor will thus go a long way in reducing the levels of dilapidation in our facilities, given the austerity measures that constrain the resources available at our disposal to address our infrastructure development and maintenance needs. I've seen many of our regions taking advantage of offender labor to do some of the critical maintenance work, and this must be applauded. Having visited the new Tsanin Correctional Center construction site in January this year, which is earmarked to add an additional 480 beds into our pool of available bed space, I am happy that many major similar projects are currently progressing as per schedule. Standerton Phase 2 has been completed, and the last phase is planned to be finished this year. The total amount of additional bed space with this new beds will yield is in excess of, well in excess of 2,000 beds. The renovated correctional center in Escort will also be completed this financial year. A while ago, government realized the need to centralize the development of a centrally coordinated and transversal information system within the criminal justice system, resulting in the introduction of the Integrated Justice System project, which is supported by establishment of portals by each of the key stakeholder departments and entities in the criminal justice system value chain that would support such a system. Living in the 21st century compels us to modernize our systems and take full advantage of information communication technology. The Integrated Inmate Management System, or IMS, is not only groundbreaking, but it streamlines business processes across all correctional facilities and provides a single view of inmate and offender information based on biometric identification. The system is up and running in Kgoshi-Mampuru II Correctional Center in Tshwane and the Johannesburg Remand Detention Center, having commenced on 19 March 2017. IMS will give us clear-cut profiles of inmates in our facilities, and such profiling is key in terms of classifying offenders accordingly. We are on course with a national rollout, and such innovation is complemented by other technological advances and platforms, such as the installation of cell phone detection technologies in 11 centers and 14 body scanners to be installed this financial year to support our efforts of beefing up security at our correctional facilities. Our responsibility is to rehabilitate all those admitted in our centers and marshal them into a new path away from a past that was characterized by criminal behavior to a future that is characterized by fully fledged members of society that are committed to playing a positive role and influence within society. The thrust of offender rehabilitation showcases correctional centers as places of new beginnings, where education and skills development are the beating heart, are the heartbeat of corrections. Those at high risk are young people who constitute more than 65% of our offender population in this country. However, we do take solace from some of our programs which point to a positive outcome. Our matriculants in the 2016 academic year achieved a 72% pass rate, albeit slightly reduced from last year's. There has been, however, improvement in the men's maths and science uptake and actually pass rates recorded amongst the class of 2016. We are also humbled by some of our partners who continue to invest in our rehabilitation programs. The National Skills Fund, NSF, has approved over 87 million rands for 2017-18 to 2018-19 financial years, targeting to skill more than 10,058 offenders. Another partnership was established with the Safety and Security Sector Education and Training Authority, SASITA, with a commitment to provide funding for the training of offenders in various accredited skills programs. The Department of Correctional Services can and will play an active role in assisting young girls who at times miss school merely because they cannot afford sanitary towels. In October 2016, DCS was granted full patent rights for the sanitary pad maintenance invented by correctional official Mr. Johan Pick at Lukop Production Workshop. This machine will enable us to make a much needed contribution to society and bring back dignity in our young women. At Boxback, 25 offenders successfully completed their training in horticulture, and the center continued to produce accredited artisans to the tune of 35 in 2016 alone. We are a department of caring individuals, and and have invited a correctional official by the name of Aubrey Baloyi as one of my special guests for his humility and goodwill. Mr. Baloyi saved 2,000 rands from his learnership stipend and bought Mr. Caesar Kumbe a wheelchair, having realized Mr. Kumbe's daily struggle of using self-made knee pads in order to crawl around. This well in line with the spirit of Ubuntu, and this is well in line with the spirit of Ubuntu, and this country needs more Baloyis amongst us. As a department, we are very proud of this young man, and I must take the opportunity and this occasion to acknowledge all other officials in our correctional facilities, sung and unsung heroes, who continue to make selfless sacrifices outside the call of duty in order to continue to play a meaningful role in changing society for the better. Correctional services will continue to offer employment through learnership programs to especially young people, to ensure that we contribute positively towards addressing the challenge of unemployment and skills shortage in our country. Our target is the youth who are most vulnerable. We also make a concerted effort to attract learners from child-headed household backgrounds, and we are privileged to have two such learners with us today, Alex Sillo Chokwe from Polokwane and Nompilo Angel Muyeni from Kokstad. I think they deserve acknowledgement from the House. Our contribution was awarded a gold medal for the best intense learnership programs and best skills program at the National Skills Authority NSA Awards ceremony that took place earlier this year. Such recognition has even encouraged us to further recruit 3,096 youth in the next learnership uptake program. It is therefore not surprising that we have reduced the backlog of unfilled vacancies by 7.2% in the past financial year within corrections. I must, however, lament our continued loss of valuable skills from experienced officials who continue to take early retirement in large numbers. literally on a monthly basis. And the challenge of having to replace such valuable experience and skills with a limited capacity to absorb new entrants at the rate would want to. A vexed issue that has repeatedly been raised with me during the Izimbizo and other public engagements is the issue of criminal records, pointed as a significant hindrance in the employment of ex-offenders. Save for minor offenses which are administratively expunged at the lapse of a period of 10 years, at the request of course, of the offender, a person retains criminal record for life, even beyond completion of their sentence, unless they receive a presidential pardon upon application in terms of Section 84 of the Constitution. This is a global practice, and it is meant, amongst other things, as an alert regarding a person's past criminal conduct for, amongst others, potential employers, but should not be construed as a necessarily a legal barrier for employment of that person or for that person accessing any other opportunity in life. We are, however, reflecting on the concerns raised and will be looking at the desirability of reviewing the law in this regard in line with international best practice in order to maximize the prospects of our former offenders to have a fresh start in life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. The next speaker is the Honourable Mocheka.
What did you do to it? Honorable House Chairperson, Honorable Minister, Honorable Deputy Ministers, Inspecting Judge Professor van der Westhuizen, National Commissioner Zak Mudise, Ministers, guests, and honorable members. The National Development Plan Vision 2030 envisages a society where everyone is and feels safe. The Department of Correctional Services plays a crucial role in contributing to this objective within the criminal justice family of institutions. The department will receive 22.8 billion for 2017-18. Its expenditure is projected to increase to about 24.4 billion in 2018-19 and 2016 26.1 billion in 2019-20. In our report, we noted the government-wide fiscal consolidation and the expenditure ceilings, which have led to some baseline reductions of 754 million rand of the DSC budget over the medium term. Like other departments, the DSC will have to adjust and learn to do more with less. However, this must not compromise service delivery. The safety of inmates and improving conditions of incarceration, rehabilitation, and social reintegration are of utmost importance. In this regard, we are pleased that the allocations for the compensation of employees will be increasing and have been ring-fenced over the medium term. This should ensure that service delivery is not affected by the cost containment cuts. We believe that the containment measures should not affect frontline staff, such as warders of the department, because that will compromise service delivery. We appreciate that the budget for rehabilitation and social reintegration have also been increased from 9.6% in 2016-17 to 11.6% of the total correctional services budget in 2017-18. We have always been complaining that these two very crucial programs, which are the center of what is envisaged in the National Development Plan, have been continuously receiving less attention when it comes to the budget. The attention they are receiving is still not enough. The shift, however, shows that the minister and the department are heeding the calls of the committee. In our view, the department's most crucial role is not locking up offenders, but ensuring their rehabilitation and social reintegration back into society. Locking of offenders is incidental. Rehabilitating them is central. The strategic and performance plans sometimes do not do justice to the role that this department plays in rehabilitating and reintegrating parolees, probationers, and ex-offenders back into society. In the plans and annual reports, achievements are denominated in numbers but do not tell a human story. In other words, achievements are expressed quantitatively. This disregards the qualitative aspect of the work of the department. The NDP states clearly that, I quote, "The successful reintegration of released inmates into society is largely dependent upon the quality of rehabilitation programs and the conditions into which they are released," I close the quote. When rehabilitation programs are good qualitatively, they empower offenders with useful skills to use when they are released. This would prevent them from relapsing back into criminal activity. Early this year, the committee called the department to come and present its rehabilitation and social reintegration programs. We asked them to tell us about the qualitative aspects of their work. As we can say, all we can say is that the department and inmates are doing a lot of good work which is not known to the public out there. However, when there are negative things happening, they get overtly publicized. We urge the minister and the department to do more community outreach, to publicize the very good work that the department is doing. For instance, the farms owned by the department produce a lot of products. The department also runs productive workshops. All these productive activities should generate some self-sufficiency for the department. It also creates some revenue for the state of about 132 million last year, which went into the national fiscus. We as the committee will support that this revenue is retained by the department to ease its funding constraints. We are aware that the DSC and National Treasury are working on a revenue splitting formula for the money generated in the farms and workshops. We recommend that this is done expeditiously. We must also note that these productive revenue generating activities also help to rehabilitate inmates by giving them skills in agriculture and artisanship. These are very handy skills for when they are reintegrated back into society. We as the committee will also support the development of internal capacity within the department in order to deal with renovations and extensions of correctional centers using offender labor and strict reservation. This should be a long-term solution which will help to ease the current delays in the completion of capital infrastructure projects. It concerns us that over the past few years, no new bed spaces have been added in the accommodation portfolio of the department due to delays which are not caused by the department. We have also recommended that the Department of Correctional Services should consider working together with the Department of Small Business Development in exploring opportunities and encouraging the creation of cooperatives where ex-offenders could receive long-term employment, transfer their skills to their communities, and thus facilitate their reintegration into society. We believe that this will go a long way in fighting recidivism. On halfway houses, the department must have learned enough and drawn lessons from the few halfway houses that it supports. It must be time to expand the program on halfway houses in order to ensure that inmates who have nowhere to return to when released are given a chance at reintegration. Honorable Minister, we must commend you for re-establishing the halfway house in Naturena in honor of Councillor Mthembu, who died during the elections. We welcome also, Mr. Minister, your assurance that the ministry will be working with JICS to ensure that it has sufficient capacity to deliver on its mandate. The issue of oversight over the conditions of incarceration is very key to our constitutional culture of human rights. In conclusion, House Chairperson, it is important to say that land disposition and the resulting triple challenge of poverty, unemployment, and inequality exacerbate the deepening moral degeneration. This makes the challenge of overcrowding a societal matter that cannot be addressed merely by improved parole system. We should recall that our icon Nelson Mandela introduced the moral regeneration movement to help us build the character of the youth and children and turn them into active and productive citizens. This government project has now been reduced to an NGO and no longer plays the role that Mandela envisaged.
Honourable Member, your time is now expired.
The ANC supports this budget, I think.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Next week is the Honourable Self.
Thank you, House Chair, and I'd like in particular to welcome the national staff here this afternoon, and also many of the regional commissioners, if not all of them, from the Western Cape. I just hope there's not a mass escape this afternoon. Just about every year, House Chair, we come to Parliament during this vote and say more or less the same things. The prisons are overcrowded, the gangs are too powerful, there's too much corruption, the staff fear for their safety, the reoffending rate is too high, and so I could carry on. The objective of any penal system must be to rehabilitate offenders, thereby lowering the crime rate. Under the current circumstances, however, very few offenders are rehabilitated, and a depressingly large number of offenders will reoffend within a depressingly short space of time. That is chiefly because the prisons are so overcrowded that with the best will in the world, meaningful rehabilitation programs are difficult to roll out, and key categories of staff, such as psychologists and educators, are in short supply. Overcrowding also allows the gangs to flourish. Now, overcrowding is driven by two major factors. The first is the result of longer sentences, to which the Minister referred, and particularly minimum sentences. And secondly, it is caused by large numbers of remand detainees who can often not be released on bail because they cannot afford to pay relatively low amounts of bail or because they have no fixed addresses. It follows that if we want to improve the chances of successful rehabilitation, we must lower the rates of overcrowding, but obviously in a responsible way. Moreover, if we want to improve the chances of successful reintegration, we must ensure that offenders are ready to be released and that they will be accepted back into society. As I said, we've been banging on about these issues for years and years, but this year, for the very first time, there are glimmers of hope that somebody in the department has been listening. When the Deputy Minister briefed the Portfolio Committee, and I'm sorry he's not speaking this afternoon, he alluded to a number of positive features that could down-manage overcrowding. The first was the finalization of a position paper on parole and the drafting of a parole bill. Reforming the parole system and making it more flexible will allow more offenders to be released before the end of their sentences. Secondly, he mentioned that a draft policy framework was being developed for the interstate transfer of offenders to serve their sentences in their countries of citizenship. I have been advocating this for at least since 1996. It makes no sense to have a foreign national serve a prison sentence in South Africa, which has to be in full since parole is not possible, and then simply to deport him or her. There are many more foreign nationals in our prisons than there are South Africans serving sentences in foreign jails, so it's a win-win for us. Thirdly, if we look at the budget, for the first time one can discern that there is a small but significant reallocation of resources away from incarceration and administration to rehabilitation and reintegration. If a new parole system is to be introduced, it is essential that the Community Corrections Branch is properly staffed and resourced to be able to monitor parolees and probationers. In this respect, it is pleasing to note that in the 2015-16 financial year, only 1.22% of parolees violated their parole conditions. It is less pleasing to note that the rollout of electronic monitoring systems is still on hold, we assume until the trial of the former ministers Boo and Debele starts. Fourthly, the number of offenders who participated in restorative justice programs and victim-offender dialogue has increased rapidly over the last 3 years. Victim-offender dialogue is not easy, both emotionally and practically, but it does improve the prospects of more successful reintegration where offenders are released. Fifthly, it was pleasing to note that the negotiations on the occupational specific dispensation have been finally concluded. This has gone on about as long as we've been trying to have the charges against Jacob Zuma reinstated. This ought to make it easier to recruit and retain the scarce skills that are so necessary for successful rehabilitation. However, the downside is that to remain within the envelope of available resources for the remuneration of employees in the department's budget, the number of employees at the coalface in the centres is likely to reduce. And sixthly, we were very encouraged by the announcement this afternoon by the Minister that he is looking again at the expungement of criminal records. It is virtually impossible to obtain employment once you admit that you have a criminal record on your CV, and I look forward with great interest to report backs in this regard. But then what was missing and disappointing in the budget and the briefings? Firstly, we would have wanted to see a greater commitment to alternative sentencing. Not every offender belongs in prison, and a more effective and satisfactory sentence may very well be community service. This has three advantages. First, offenders literally contribute back to the society that they have harmed in a visible and tangible way. Secondly, such offenders are not exposed to criminal elements as they would be in overcrowded facilities. And thirdly, this is much, much cheaper. However, these sort of sentences will only be handed down by judges and magistrates when they are confident that the offenders can be properly monitored by community corrections. Secondly, we are concerned at the large amounts of money for agency and outsourced services that has increased by 135% this year to 1.5 billion. We all know that outsourced services come at a premium and that they are not subject to the same form of parliamentary scrutiny that departmental services are. We are equally concerned at the 9% increase in expenditure on communications to 88.5 million. and the 29 million allocated to a feasibility study for a new headquarters for the department. These are nice to haves, but do not address the core business of rehabilitating offenders and correcting offending behavior. But seen as a whole, the budget is starting to be aligned better to the ideals of the white paper. We will continue to keep the department under very close scrutiny, but I think it's safe to say that it is now safe for the department to be moved out of intensive care. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Matiase.
House Chair, the Economic Freedom Fighters reject budget vote 18 of the Correctional Services. We reject it for the following reason.
Order, Honourable Members.
The National Commissioner of Correctional Services, Mr. Zakaria Modisa, decried the phenomenon of overcrowding in South African prisons and pleaded with various departments in the justice, crime prevention, and security cluster to play their role in reducing overcrowding in our country correctional facilities. This necessitated the Western Cape High Court to rule in December that the number of inmates in Portsmouth remain detention facility be reduced to 150% of its capacity within 6 months. Before this ruling, Portsmouth was 247% above its accommodation capacity. There is no correctional activity that can ever happen under those conditions. And it is for this reason that we have always argued over since we have been here in Parliament, that it seems that the purpose of our correctional facilities is no longer corrective, but rather retributive justice. Secondly, there is a general state of neglect and disrepair of our correctional facilities, and the department is ill-equipped to deal with this matter. Linked to this is the fact that there are thousands of inmates who are incarcerated for years without their matter having been concluded on trial. These are most young black people who are arrested for petty crimes and go into prison as petty criminals and come back as hardened criminals. Instead of being corrective in nature, correctional facilities are breeding ground for hardened criminals. Thirdly, this department has failed to process thousands of outstanding applications for parole from long-term prisoners. Minister Masuta had promised here in the past in this parliament to deal with this matter, and he has failed to do so. This is to the extent that Lawyers for Human Rights, the Civil Society for Prison Reform Initiative, and the National Institute for Crime and Rehabilitation of Offenders threatened to take the department to court. Fourthly, the minister has spectacularly failed to deal with the matter of parole boards in this country. In October, at least 35 boards in 5 provinces indicated that they would embark on a new court bid to force prison services to pay allowances legislated in 2007. With dysfunctional parole boards, we are sure to have a dysfunctional parole service. The ineptitude and incompetency of the minister is at the center of all of this fracas. He has completely ignored the plight of our correctional services facilities. In the proposed budget, 61% of the 22.8 billion will go to incarceration. Rehabilitation, care, and social integration combined will only get about 11%. This is a case of misplaced priorities. The Economic Freedom Fighters recognize the importance of locking up criminals who bring so much pain to this nation. That is why we are waiting with bated breath for Zuma to swap his Saxon well-designed suits with his orange overalls. We can't wait for that moment. But we recognize that historically, prisons were places where black dreams and aspirations were shattered. It is for this reason that we are advocating for correctional services that is corrective in nature. People must come out of correctional facilities with renewed hope and determination to change their ways and be useful citizens of this country. To have this, Mr. Minister, We need courageous and visionary leadership. And all of that lacks in you. And the leadership of this department does not possess these qualities. And there's nothing personal about this that Zakaria Modise, Khabanieso. Maemo a ditšhankane a soka fetoa mme botlhokotsebe bo ntse bo nyara ditšhankana mme lefapha le bona ha le na le maikemisetso a utlwisa hono pheletsong lo bona hore batshwaruwa ba fetola mekgwa ya bona mme ba ntlafatswe le ho matlafatswa hore ba tle ba kgone ka iphidisa le ho fepa malapa a bona ka mora hore ba sebetse le ho qeta nako ya bona ya kahlolo ditšhankaneng. Re tshepa hore baetapele ba tlileng pele ho wena ntate Modise. Le ba
Honourable
tlileng
member,
pele ho
your
minister,
time is now
ba
expired.
sitilwe ho ka tlisa diphetoho tse hlokahalang lefapheng lena. The EFF rejects this budget vote.
The next speaker is the Honourable Nsimang.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair, Honorable Minister Masuta and other ministers, honorable members. One phenomenon which has become a perennial challenge in the Department of Correctional Services is overcrowding in our correctional centers. This has become so serious that the government was taken to court in the recent Portsmouth case of Sonke Gender Justice versus the South African government. In this case, the court found, and I quote, that the conditions such as accommodation facilities, cleanliness, health standards, infrastructure, and provision of meals fell short of what was required in the Correctional Services Act, end of quote. What is very disconcerting is that the conditions in Portsmouth prison are similar to other big correctional centers throughout the country. The situation is so serious that the court ordered the DCS to submit monthly reports on progress made to remedy the situation. In fact, the situation leads to the conclusion that we are losing the war against crime and that our rehabilitation and reintegration endeavors are not bearing fruit. Of course, society should not point a finger only in the effectiveness of the correctional services. Society should also focus on the causes of crime and make every effort to address them. One of the biggest drivers of crime is unemployment. Another is the abundance of drugs which are easily available, especially to the youth, and the failure of police and the courts to deal adequately with this scourge. We should also consider the implications of influx of millions of illegal immigrants who easily flock into this country through our porous borders. All these factors combined make the citizens of this country feel that they are not safe. Judging by the allocation of budget, the IFP is of the view that the DCS has still not prioritized the program of rehabilitation of sentenced offenders and their social reintegration. From the budget of 22.8 billion rand, the rehabilitation program is allocated only 1.8 billion, and the social reintegration program received only 855.2 million. Compare these to the incarceration program, which is allocated a whopping 13.9 billion rand. which is estimated to climb to 15 billion in 2018 to 19 and escalate to 45.3 billion in 2019 to 20. This escalation, which more than triples the current budget, is very frightening because it shows the extent to which crime is expected to rise in South Africa. The ideal situation would be to see incarceration budget decreasing proportionally to the increasing rehabilitation budget.
Honourable Member, your time is now expired.
The IFP supports this budget. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is Honourable Ngwabe.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Minister, Deputy Ministers, Honorable Members, and the guests in the gallery. The NFP welcomes the budget as presented here today. And we are much encouraged by the reported success of the Department of Correctional Services in the increased number of sentenced offenders undergoing rehabilitation or correctional programs. In the past years, the department had been severely criticized for its failure to execute this important aspect of its mandate, and we welcome the improvement. We also welcome the reported progress in the fight against TB among the inmates and the rollout of antiviral treatment program for inmates who are HIV positive. We are, however, disappointed to note that problems relating to overcrowding, unsanitary detention conditions, and general health standard persist in the correctional centers and remand detention facilities. It is imperative that these challenges be addressed as a matter of priority. And these conditions is the violation of human rights of inmates and detainees. The NFP welcomes the reduction in Program 1 and 2, which resulted in an increase in Program 3 and 5. We are encouraged to see that rehabilitation and social reintegration are being given greater prominence in the budget allocation in comparison with previous financial years. This is in keeping with the NFP policy on correctional services, which favors a restorative justice over penal considerations and promotes the meaningful reintegration of offenders in the mainstream society as an important consideration. We are in full support of the recommendation of the Portfolio Committee that we share the concern of the Portfolio Committee on the impact of the reduction in the baseline budget and its potential negative effects on the department's operations and ability to deliver social services in accordance with its mandate. We are also in agreement that the department should give serious consideration to establish departmental regions to coincide with our provinces, as the current structure of 6 regions do not adequately provide for efficient management of correctional services across all our provinces equally. Finally, we support the recommendation of the committee that the department should redouble its effort at working with other sister departments in the criminal justice cluster to down manage the remand population in its detention centers and overcrowding in its correctional centers. We concur that existing legislative provisions such as bail protocol and Section 49G of the Correctional Services Act is underutilized and could be employed to address the problems of overcrowding with noticeable efficiency. We support the budget of the department. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Deputy Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, responsible for correctional services.
Honorable House Chair, the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Honorable Advocate Masuta, it is indeed a pleasant development that your health has allowed you to be with us in this sitting this afternoon. And thanks to your courageous, spirit in handling your health condition. Honorable members of the Portfolio Committee of Justice and Correctional Services, distinguished guests in the House today, ladies and gentlemen, our country is a nation that emerged from the ashes and anguish of apartheid to create a better life for all. We are on our way, despite the challenges we still face. Together, we must continue to deepen democracy and build safer communities. We cannot allow crime and criminal activities to derail us. The struggle for freedom secured the right for all South Africans to be part of our democracy. It was Fyodor Dostoevsky who said, and I quote, "The degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its presence." The late Letsau Nelson Diale, one of the former members of this portfolio committee in the first parliament of the democratic South Africa, himself a former prisoner on Robben Island, had this to say about his prison experience, and I quote, "We were handcuffed in such a way that our body movement was curtailed a great deal. We urinated onto ourselves because we were not given any chance to relieve ourselves, that is on being transported from Leeuwkop to Robben Island. The chains were only removed from us at night when we were dumped in a small cell with one toilet. When we arrived at the harbor, they violently dragged us from the boat, the chains causing our hands and feet much pain. At 6 o'clock in the morning, that is at Robben Island, we would be headed to have breakfast that consisted of a little watery, thin, soft porridge without any butter, milk, or sugar. A prisoner had to squat as if on his marks at the beginning of a race in an open prison yard and scoop up the porridge with his fingers in a cup shape. One had to eat very quickly, guarded by many warders armed to the teeth. Our lunch consisted of a small portion of mealies. It would sometimes be served covered with sand and a little bit of puzamandla, a certain liquid meal produced for prisoners by certain factories. The warders forced prisoners to sit on cold stones in the quarry for the whole day throughout all the years. This exercise caused the prisoners to develop piles. When the prisoners were ordered back from the quarry to prison yard, there was a very painful and humiliating practice called tauza, whereby prisoners would be forced to take off their prison clothes and throw them on a pile and remain naked, waiting for the order to show their backsides to the prison warder for inspection. When the warder was satisfied by his inspection, he would kick and assault the prisoners, forcing them to run and grab any uniform that was in the mixed pile and fall in line barefoot. No shoes were supplied. The prisoners would then be instructed to take their supper, which consisted of watery, thin, soft porridge again, after which they would be locked in the cells, given one mat and one blanket. Some prisoners developed diseases such as asthma and TB and passed away because of one of these diseases. This is my experience. This is what I experienced for a solid period of 8 years living on Robben Island, unquote. The degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its presence, and Dostoevsky observed. The genesis of South Africa's penal system was crafted through the Prisons and Reformatories Act promulgated in 1911, which decreed that prisons of the Union of South Africa shall be strictly segregated, secret, and use corporal punishment. Abuse grew to appalling heights over decades. Attempts to disclose what was going on in apartheid prisons led to fierce persecution of the media and others. It took nearly a century of struggle before a new democratic government introduced measures to guarantee the fundamental rights of every citizen, including offenders. It is the Correctional Services Act 111 of 1998, together with the White Paper on Corrections in South Africa, which facilitated a new paradigm shift, opting for corrections through rehabilitative interventions. The Western Cape High Court judgment in the Sonke gender justice matter has in recent months put the spotlight on the general conditions at our correctional centers, particularly the big 5 centers of Pollsmoor, St. Albans, Durban Westville, Johannesburg, and Kgoshi-Mampuru II. In his report to Pollsmoor, on Pollsmoor Correctional Center, Remand, Detention and Women's Center, Justice Cameron of the Constitutional Court of South Africa said, and I quote, "The Constitution provides that detainees and sentenced prisoners have the right to conditions of detention that are consistent with human dignity. This provision requires that at a minimum, prisoners and detainees should have access to exercise, adequate accommodation, nutrition, reading material, and medical treatment. The Constitution also seeks to protect prisoners and detainees from cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. In addition, the Correctional Services Act stipulates that correctional centers must have, among other things, sufficient space to enable inmates to move freely and sleep comfortably within the confines of their cells, accommodation that is properly ventilated, cells with sufficient natural and artificial lighting that allows inmates to read and write, sufficient and accessible ablution facilities available to all inmates at all times, including access to hot and cold water for washing purposes, and a separate bed and bedding for every inmate which provides adequate warmth for the climatic conditions and which complies with hygienic requirements," unquote. I went into length to quote the remarks of Judge Cameron to demonstrate or to illustrate how big the challenge is for the Department of Correctional Services to meet the prescripts of the law in this country with respect to providing secure and safe custody to citizens. Despite various challenges in response to the court order to reduce overcrowding at Pollsmoor Remand Detention Center by at least 150%, an action plan implemented in collaboration with the JCPS cluster saw the population reduced, as the minister said earlier on, from 4,066 on the 6th of December last year to 2,570 on the 8th of May this year, which amounts to almost the halving of that population. The action plan is multi-pronged to include, among others, the following: Pollsmoor Medium A, Goodwood and Malmesbury correctional facilities were converted to be full-time remand detention facilities to alleviate the influx from the courts in the Western Cape. Accordingly, 1,000 sentenced offenders were transferred to the Free State and Northern Cape region. The position of head of center has been filled. Progress has also been made in terms of physical exercise to increase the frequency of exercise from 2 to 4 times a week. Basic medical supplies and medication is such that in February, the turnaround time for issuing prescriptions has decreased from 48 hours to 24 hours. Pollsmoor is now utilizing an on-site laboratory service with the Gene Expert machine to improve the turnaround time for sputum results. That is with respect to the test for TB. With respect to feeding, the current shift system and acute staff shortages are an objective constraint to the strict adherence to Section 8.5 of the Correctional Services Act governing the provision of meals. However, offenders are still provided with 3 meals per day. With respect to bed spaces, due to the down management of the totals of the remand detention facility population, there is now adequate beds for offenders. The hygiene conditions have remarkably improved with the addition of 8 domestic washing machines for the purposes of providing clean blankets and the repair of some of the machines that were in disrepair. New admissions are now receiving clean blankets on arrival. There are single cells that are utilized as an informal library. Whilst Pollsmoor is not an isolated syndrome, such conditions are certainly not prevalent at all the 243 facilities in our country. Other recommendations overcrowding following his visit to Pollsmoor, and these include, among others, to address the appeal that we address the case of incarceration of offenders beyond their mandatory period, incarceration period. 2, the incarceration of offenders pending further investigation by the investigating officers within SAPS. That practice also that it needs to be managed. That there should also be considered an amnesty for those sentenced for R1 to 1,000 rand fines. And lastly, that an unsympathetic attitude towards the poor by the courts, for an example, not granting bail because of unavailability of fixed addresses to offenders, to those who live in informal settlements, it's something that needs to be addressed as well. For the past financial year, our quest to fight tuberculosis has seen 83% of offenders being treated, whilst inmate testing for HIV was at 123%, and the provision of antiretroviral therapy at 98%. Numerous programs are in place to improve the welfare of inmates and to promote healthy living conditions. Conditions of detention consistent with human dignity compels the department to deal effectively with gangs in correctional facilities. Gang culture has a long history, as speakers before me have already commented, in South Africa. The numbers prison gangs can trace their origins back to the prisons, mine compounds, and informal settlements as far back as 1824. In practice, good government has been reactive. In practice, government has been reactive and anti-gang strategy. The anti-gang strategy has not yielded the desired outcome, partly because they have been restricted to policing and the criminal justice system. At the request of the JCPS cluster, the national anti-gang strategy has been formulated to address not only the phenomenon and impact of gangsterism, but also the prevention of gangsterism as a socio-economic phenomenon. In line with the national strategy, the Department of Correctional Services is also implementing an anti-gang strategy. Challenges being encountered by the Department of Correctional Services include the absence of sustained gang-centered programs, as well as integrated holistic approach to managing gangs. This weakness has been recently acknowledged by management and will be part of efforts to bring the new government-wide anti-gang strategy to life. Following the wholesale attack on officials on the 26th of December last year, which resulted in the death of 3 offenders and injuries to 13 officials, I visited St. Albans Maximum Correctional Center in Port Elizabeth on the 17th of March 2017 for an interactive stakeholder session to address gang-related issues that affect both the incarcerated population and our workforce and the surrounding communities in St. Albans. On the 11th April 2017, I was back again at St. Albans and engaged officials and offenders about their strained relations and working conditions. Some of the interventions at St. Albans include the following. All offenders involved in the December 26 incident were removed from Maximum to Port Elizabeth Correctional Center. In addressing some of the complaints of the offenders, some of them were transferred to facilities closer to their families. Management is implementing an action plan to address concerns raised by officials. These concerns include staff shortages, divided management approaches, information gaps between staff and management, impact of shift pattern on operations and the associated risks to officials, human resource administration, performance management, service benefits as well, and inconsistencies in injury on duty management, and the application of common approaches to work so that the department's policies are implemented in a uniform manner. We continue to give staffing issues of correctional facilities serious attention, and we have called upon the department to ensure that there is no sluggishness in dealing with human resource matters. Examples of these managerial lapses is, for instance, the recent violence that was reported to have taken place at the Standerton Correctional Center in Mpumalanga.
Deputy Minister, your time is up.
House Chair, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Honorable Maila.
House Chairperson, Honorable Minister, Minister Masuta, Honorable Deputy Ministers, Deputy Minister Makwetla and Deputy Minister Jeffries, Honorable Members of the House, the Inspecting Judge, Judge Johan van der Westhuizen in absentia, DCS officials led by the National Commissioner, Commissioner Modise. Allow me to focus on the Judicial Inspectorate of Correctional Services as a necessary tool that can turn correctional centers into centers of excellence. We are a people from a sad past, a past which was characterized by the use of prisons as tools for oppression. The picture painted by Honorable Makwetla shows us exactly what was happening at that time. Many of our heroes who fought for the liberation of our country were subjected to harsh and inhumane conditions of prison life. In the view of O.R. Tambo, who would have turned 100 this year, prison life served as a metaphor for apartheid. It thus became imperative, Honorable Chairperson, that in our transformation agenda, we had to demilitarize prisons and turn them into correctional centers. The sacrifices of our heroes have been acknowledged when in 2015, the United Nations General Assembly revised and renamed the standard minimum rules for treatment of prisoners, the Nelson Mandela rules. The rules cover areas like the right of inmates to be treated with respect and dignity, the right to be provided with health care by the state, investigations of death and torture, and protection of vulnerable groups, to name but a few. Chapter 9 of the Transformative Correctional Services Act provides for the establishment of JICS, which is an oversight body mandated to report on the treatment of inmates and the conditions of correctional centers. The inspectorate is thus tasked with the mammoth task of preventing human rights abuses in correctional centers. JICS is expected to play this role without fear or favor. Overcrowding, obviously, is a major stumbling block towards making JICS to perform their mandate with excellence. Genuine concerns are raised on the independence of JICS as it performs its oversight role. The research conducted by the Vets Justice Project has confirmed that the independence of the inspectorate is constrained by factors such as the inability to make enforceable recommendations to the department, the inability to refer cases directly to the National Prosecuting Authority, as well as financial independence. These are matters which are receiving attention of JICS and the Department of Correctional Services. These efforts have been recognized by organizations such as NICRO. The inspectorate is aiming to achieve independence, though it is in a progressive manner. The duty of building a strong and independent JICS does not only rely on the availability of resources. It also requires courage and determination to conduct oversight in an unbiased and an impartial manner. We do welcome the inspections in prisons by sitting judges and magistrates as enhancement of oversight. We, however, appeal that this exercise should be done in collaboration with the inspecting judge. It is encouraging today to hear Honorable Self singing a different tune from the tune that he sings over the years, which tune says, at least now, the DA is admitting that the idea of the African National Congress of turning prisons into correctional centers is working. Over the years, the DA has been playing the devil's advocate by opposing everything that the ANC was coming up with. It was not surprising because obviously members of the DA, especially those from the White Caucus, can never imagine
Honorable Maila.
Can never imagine
Honorable Maila.
what we mean by
Your time is
prison
up.
life. The White Caucus of the DA is composed mostly of verkrampte right-wingers
Honorable
who
Maila.
still value apartheid and colonialism.
Honorable Maila.
That is why they want
Your time
to
is up.
reverse. Thank you. The ANC supports the budget.
Honorable Madisha.
Thank you very much. As COPE understand it, the Department of Correctional Services has 3 strategic objectives, namely to ensure an effective criminal justice system through the efficient management of remand process. Secondly, to ensure that society is protected through incarcerated offenders being secure and being rehabilitated. And 3, to facilitate the reintegration of offenders back to communities as law-abiding citizens. Our correctional centers and remand detention facilities are overcrowded. Accommodation facilities, cleanliness, health standards, infrastructure, and the provision of meals generally fall short of what is required in the Correctional Services Act. There is a need to attend to these matters such as ordered by the Western Cape High Court in respect of the Portsmouth Correctional Facility. To help alleviate some of these challenges, rehabilitation and social reintegration strategies will have to be improved. Our correctional services centers have more than 150,000 people, the majority of whom are, of course, young black children, which is actually a very serious problem. Saying the majority because 1/3 of them is young black children. The sad reality is that many of these young lives are more often broken or further destroyed in prison. The department still spends the bulk of its budget on incarceration and an insufficient amount on rehabilitation. And so the cycle of criminality, incarceration, little or no rehabilitation, reoffense, and further incarceration without any real hope
1 minute.
of an alternative future becomes the accepted norm. COPE notes the own goal scored by ANC by charging the economic policy trajectory and changing it, of course, developed in the Mandela and Mbeki eras, and introducing policies that did great damage. That is a major problem, and that has got to be looked into. We now have a stagnating economy and no fiscal space to maneuver. And then Mr. Zuma acted
Honorable
irrationally and pushed the
Honorable
junk
Madisha,
button.
your time is up. Your time is up, sir.
Oh.
Thank you. Honorable Mpumlwana.
Somlomo ndilisekileyo sidwende zethu ezixabisekileyo. Umphathiswa namasekela akhe namalungu abekekileyo kwanesizwe esisulungekileyo bhotani. Ndithunywa ngukhongolose ukuzokuxhasa esi sabelo-mali seSebe lezoLuleko. Ndiqinisa kwingxam yokwamkelwa kwamabanjwa eluntwini. Nxema wethu, ndicela ukhe nditswebe kwelasemzini ngenxa yoluntu ngokubanzi. ANC pleads with the House to support the DCS budget. I emphasize here in their program of reintegration offenders into society. I dedicate this small contribution to our leader, O.R. Tambo, who said at the UN on the 26th of October 1976, and I quote, "We shall have a South Africa in which the young of our country shall have access to the best that mankind has produced, in which they shall be taught to love their people of all races, to defend equality of people, to honor creative labor, to uphold oneness of mankind, and to hate untruth and immorality." In its election manifesto of 1994, the ANC undertook to develop a program that emphasized rehabilitation of offenders rather than revenge. This is in line with Ubuntu proverb that says, "Akukho mgqomo wokulahla umntu." There is no dustbin for people. As well as with Ubuntu principle of forgiveness and reconciliation instead of retribution. Secondly, our constitution and democratic order is underpinned by the ethos of reconciliation over retribution. And the architects of our freedom had it in their hearts that even those who are in conflict with law must be given another chance to succeed in life once they have served their sentences. Colonialists created prisons for incarceration of offenders, particularly Africans, and regarded them as outcasts of civilized society. They also used prisons to punish their political opponents. The Caring People's Movement, the African National Congress government, changed them into correctional services centers, where offenders are temporarily kept, corrected, and then integrated back to society as changed people. Long live the ANC government, long live. Long live. The offender is scared to face his community. Many people will not trust that he has repented. They will either be scared of him or hate him and want to harm him. Employees are also reluctant to employ ex-offenders. Thus, an outreach to community is crucial to the success of reintegration. In this exercise, it is important to educate society. They fear the offender or hate him for the crime he has committed. They not only must be persuaded to forgive him, they must also accept him as part of them. DCS makes it easy for society to accept the offender by correcting him, make him accept and be sorry for his crime, educate him, and make him be employable. The DCS officials work very hard under very difficult circumstances to try and break the cycle of crime, and their effort has yielded good results. The success rate of integration of offenders during the 2016-2017 year is over 80%. This DCS this year has allocated 877 million rand for integration. Unlike what Mr. Self has said, most offenders are young people, and thus it is crucial that we integrate them into society and break the cycle of crime. Otherwise, we'll lose many generations of African people. I hope this Zumaphobia by EFF and Big Brother DA will come to an end. And this House shall appreciate the good work done by this government through the DCS. I again respectfully request that you accept this budget. I thank you all.
Thank you, Honorable Pumlan. Honorable Swart.
Thank you, House Chair. Now, House Chair, we sit with a dilemma that whilst we expect much from this department, the funds going forward in the medium term are being decreased. And so that is the dilemma that we, as members of parliament, when we are exercising oversight, is it fair to expect increased performance when the funds are not sufficient? So with that background, we sit, many members have referred to overcrowding and the delays in additional bed space, but this we know remains a challenge, and that is one of the main contributory factors to gangsterism and of course the spread of diseases, as was pointed out in the Sonke Gender court case. But it raises a question, how did we as MPs fail in our oversight? Why was it a court that had to find that Pollsmoor was not living up to the Correctional Services Act? And I think that we can lift our game, Honourable Chair, to see to what degree we are lacking in our oversight. Because it is a matter of concern, Deputy Minister. You indicated that the conditions at Pollsmoor exist at other, although not prevalent, they are also at other prisons, and that obviously opens the door for other litigation with costs on the same basis. But there are glimmers of hope, and I want to commend the Commissioner and his staff on the exceptional work that they are doing under very trying conditions with a very limited budget. And as far as overcrowding is concerned, again, let us make use of sections 63A and 62F of the Criminal Procedure Act. I see that we can, and it's something I have recommended for many, many years, that we can apply this to release remand prisoners who have been detained at a huge state expense. There's also section 49G of the Act, which seeks to limit the period of time an accused is held in remand detention. And of course, we look forward to the parole bill and the interstate transfer of prisoners. So there is a glimmer of hope. And those of you that know me know that I have always stood for restorative justice as opposed to retributive justice. So Advocate Mpilwana, I fully support you as far as restorative justice is concerned, and I'm pleased with the increase in the number of restorative justice programs attended by victims, parolees, and probationers. And we need our communities to understand that restorative justice is not soft on crime, and incorporate community members and family members. And then, of course, from the ACDP's perspective, we cannot underestimate the role that spiritual renewal plays in this regard of rehabilitation. And we want to commend all spiritual workers, and in particular those that adopt and apply the alpha courses in prisons, where we see a dramatic change in the offender's behavior. We also would like to commend the department on the productivity of its farms and factories. This contributes significantly to self-sufficiency, and we would strongly urge that those funds are ring-fenced from National Treasury to the department. So whilst the department is facing many financial challenges, the ACDP wishes to thank all those managers and staff members who, under extremely difficult and dangerous conditions, diligently do their work in trying to ensure that offenders are kept in safe, secure, and humane custody and undergo rehabilitation and restorative justice programs. The ACDP will support this budget vote. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Swart. Honorable Pongo.
Thank you very much, House Chair, Honorable Minister, Honorable Deputy Ministers present, Commissioner and the CFO, Honorable members. Commissioner, I should start by this, that as Parliament, we don't take very light the work that we're doing. We're doing a very important work for the people of this country, and we appreciate that as the ANC. We support this budget vote. The budget vote takes place against a backdrop of President Zuma and the African National Congress having declared the whole of this year as the year of Comrade Oliver Reginald Tambo, who, like Honorable Mamalile said, would have 100 years this year. The people of this country has a lot to learn from Comrade Oliver Tambo. Comrade Oliver Tambo was a patriot, he was an internationalist, he was a pastor in his own right, he was a mathematician, he was a scientist, and he was also a lawyer, among others. Honorable Chair, before 1994, when the ANC took over government, prisons were used by the apartheid government, which is represented by this white caucus this side, to oppress black people and to stress what Deputy Minister has said about those that were in Robben Island. When we took over government as the African National Congress, we have introduced progressive legislation, which in the main are responding to all the problems that we are faced with today. Honorable Swart is speaking about the issue of restorative justice. Honorable Matthias is speaking about the issue of 1 billion going to rehabilitation. That is so because the legislation quoted by Honorable Makwetla was enacted in 1911. It had to continue for a long period up until 1994, when we have introduced the white paper, which white paper is also agreeing what Honorable Self is saying, which was said in the case in the case by the learned Judge Kriegler, as he then was in the case of versus R, that we have two types of offenders. There are those offenders that the democratic government must look at currently and look at them and say, this one they deserve, having done the crime, but they must go back and be reintegrated to society. But there are those that must go to the centers. So we should commend the department for the work that he has done and the white paper that he has done. The white paper, among others, it has introduced the offender-victim engagement, which are currently happening under the leadership of the minister. It has introduced that families must be able to meet with communities to discuss on how to rehabilitate and reintegrate the offenders to society. We've also dealt with a number of things in terms of the white paper. At the center of what the white paper is raising is that NGO and community-based organizations must be able to be at the center in terms of dealing with issues that affect the offenders in the prisons. One other important issue which was reported by the department, as they reported in terms of rehabilitation, was that those offenders who were doing grade 8 to grade 12, there were 10,008 who managed to pass to the next level. Those who had to do grade 12, we had 10,051 who successfully did their grade 12 inside the centers. Post-matric, we had 554 which were reported by the department. Those with computer-based training, a report was given that it's 500. But there are agricultural programs that have been introduced in the department where offenders are being trained on agricultural programs, and we're told that the money that is being generated, it goes back to the fiscus. So we're likely to have self-sufficiency in terms of dealing with issues that relate to offenders. We also congratulate the department that there are a lot of sporting activities that are taking place to search for talent in terms of sports. I think that is progressive. The policies of the ANC find their background in the main, I think, from the Holy Book, which is the Bible, which Honorable White is not quoting. Because when God created man and man committed a sin, God gave man a second chance. That is why he sent his only begotten son, so that we don't perish, we have eternal life. So as the African National Congress, the African National Congress government is committed in creating a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, united, and a prosperous country. So the ANC support this budget once more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Pongo. Honorable Hon.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, it is indeed not difficult to identify the remaining sore fingers on the hand of correctional services, as has been done here today by colleagues like the Honourable Self, and even the Honourable Bongo, or should I call him Pastor Bongo, who so liberally referred to improved alignment with the white paper. He of course failed to explain to this House why only in 2017 do we see any implementation of the 2005 ANC white paper. Chair, at the risk of oversimplifying the problems faced by DCS, it must be stated that indeed, as colleagues mentioned, overcrowding remains the big problem. If addressed successfully, a ripple effect will be caused which will improve not only the quality of incarceration and care, but also that of rehabilitation and social reintegration. This will simultaneously help to address the problems alluded to by the Minister of DCS constantly struggling to retain skilled staff and maintain staff morale and motivation. Chair, more than 20 years into our democracy, it's really unacceptable that some DCS facilities house 2.5 times the number of detainees it was intended for. And it really should not have been necessary for a judge of the Constitutional Court to visit Pollsmoor and an NGO to approach our courts for an order to enforce his findings in order to get DCS to craft and implement a plan to reduce overcrowding at this facility. Chair, through you to ANC colleagues in committee, maybe rather than using briefings like the one last week on how DCS has responded to the judicial report and the court order into conditions at Pollsmoor, to criticize the judiciary, as has become the norm in committee, because the judiciary has pointed out this sore finger, and rather than proposing that this Correctional Services Act must be amended to take away this right, only to make a U-turn through the Honourable Mahila here today on this issue, we as members of the legislature should hold some introspection as to why the judiciary is more effective in pointing out the human rights violations at our correctional facilities and bringing about the changes in living conditions of detainees we in committee only talk about. Chair, I will tell you why. It's because you as ANC members are too scared to hold the executive properly to account. You use your majority to ensure committees pay only lip service to oversight. And as we have warned you, this specific committee has last in 2014 visited any prison, which is really shameful. But this has now caught up with you, and the reality is that if you did not, for the sake of political expediency over the years, created a situation where reporting are equalized to accounting, the Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services could have been instrumental in ensuring that everything addressed in the directives issued by the Western Cape High Court could have been implemented long ago. What's worse, Chair, is that instead of looking failure squarely in the eye and making a promise to yourself that going forward you will do better, you rather berate the judiciary for overreach and ask why judges are allowed to inspect correctional facilities. This is a sad indication of how unsuited the current ANC has become to government in our constitutional democracy. Chair, proper oversight would long have demanded of DCS to craft and implement the type of plans which was now ordered by our courts. Proper oversight would long have ensured that build programs so necessary to create the additional bed spaces referred to by the Minister is accelerated beyond the ever-growing promise, recycled every year and presented as a fresh plan to create thousands of bed spaces. Because proper oversight, Chair, will always strengthen governance. The type of good, clean governance that will ensure that the capital budget of DCS is not only spent, but spent in a prudent, responsible manner. Ensuring that the taxpayer gets value for money for every cent allocated to DCS and earmarked for the building and refurbishment of correctional facilities, the upgrading of IT and reporting systems, of money allocated not only for the care of offenders, but also their rehabilitation and reintegration. Chair, now that the audit outcomes of DCS have improved, now that we see a better alignment of this budget to the NDP and the white paper, it is time, through the committee, to ensure that governance at DCS is also improved. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Khan. Honourable Pilane Machake.
Honourable Chairperson of the House, honourable members of Parliament, members of the Executive, Inspecting Judge of Correctional Services, Judge van der Westhuizen, Senior Management of Correctional Services under the leadership of Commissioner Modise, Dumelang. I wish to just begin by thanking the Executive and Management of Correctional Services for the job well done under very difficult and trying circumstances. As articulated by Deputy Minister Magwetla, we come from a very difficult past, and he gave the example of the kind of what was called prisons, now correctional services, that we had in South Africa, and the kind of atrocities that actually happened in those centers. You realize that this apartheid that was declared crime against humanity by the United Nations really did so much of harm to the people of South Africa. And the harm was about even the kind of facilities that were actually built to house inmates after they were convicted, which is what the ANC government is actually trying to undo. What is actually fascinating is to keep on hearing a voice on the sidelines, keeping on saying, hurry and get it right. Hurry and get it right from the same people that actually created these institutions over years. But they have now the audacity to keep on shouting and saying, this is not right. This has to be done. It has to be done quickly. Otherwise, we take you to court. We need to actually understand the importance of progressive realization of rights. South Africa is not going to change overnight. Over time, we will be in the position to get it right. And molaetsa ke tshwantseng ko fe batho ba South Africa ko gore le seke la hela pelo re le mmuso wa ANC re na le lona le rata le le utlwang ha se le rata la sepe ke le rata fela la batho ba ileng gore ha go votiwa ha ba kerea matla a go busa mme ba batla go ipona ba busa ke ka mo ba tla dirang gore ka metlha yotlhe ha ba bua ba bue ekete go na le something e wrong e leng gore ANC ya e dira khanta go na next ANC ya e dirang e leng gore e na le molato rona re molaetsa o tsamaelana le tsa correctional services ke o tshwanetse o omanye o rate o thuse o sentseng go itse go fetoga gore le yena a tlotswela pele a bane le bokamoso bo tlhamaletseng ke molaetsa o re o romelang ga re ba rona ba ba sentseng re se ke ra ba kenya mo tseleng re tlo ba kenya mo tseleng sentle hela. According to its 2015-16 to 2019-2020 strategic plan, Department of Correctional Service mission is to contribute to a just, peaceful and safer South Africa through the effective and humane incarceration of inmates, rehabilitation and social integration of offenders. Amongst the successes the department highlighted was the increased number of sentenced offenders undergoing rehabilitation, 72% pass rate for inmates who wrote matric in 2016, and improved levels of compliance with parole and probation conditions. The department is also making huge progress in the fight against tuberculosis, with 82% of affected inmates receiving treatment, 99% of all inmates having been tested for HIV, while 97% of those affected were receiving antiretroviral treatment. Among the challenges the department highlighted is the overcrowding, which almost all the speakers spoke about. The phenomenon which is actually affecting remand detainees. Deputy Minister of Correctional Services, Thaba Makwetla, in his presentation to the Portfolio Committee, cited the recent judgment matter between Sonke Justice versus South African government by Western Cape High Court, in which the condition of incarceration of remand detainees at Paulsmoor Correctional Center were found to be in violation of Correctional Services Act. We've had numerous speakers coming here to talk about it, and some are actually alluding to the fact that why was it not the responsibility of the Portfolio Committee to do oversight to the extent that it must be a judge that goes and develops a report that is taken to court. The Portfolio Committee continues to have this responsibility, but at the same time, Honorable Horn, nobody ever said it was wrong for the judge to actually go and visit. What amazes me is how all the time when you come to the podium, you actually make it a point that you patronize the judiciary. You always want to talk to the judiciary like the ANC is against the judiciary. I'm not sure what is it that you hope to benefit. But the important thing is that the Department of Correctional Services has accepted the order, regardless of what you can want to actually express. They are busy now working on the order to make it a point that the situation of Paulsmoor is improved. The Deputy Minister also highlighted the agency of capacitating the Judicial Inspectorate of Correctional Services, because at the same time for us to be in the position to make necessary interventions as the Portfolio Committee, we also depend on the reports that we get from the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services. In terms of overview of the budget of the Department of Correctional Services, the Department of Correctional Services will receive in 2017-2018 22.8 billion, or 5.72% higher than 2016-2017. Expenditures projected to increase to about 24 billion in 2018-2019 and 26.1 billion in 2019-2020. The Department of Correctional Services budget is distributed across the following 5 programs: administration, incarceration, rehabilitation, care, and social integration. As in the previous years, the bulk of the allocation, about 79.5%, goes towards the administration and incarceration program, which will receive 18.2% and 61.3% respectively of the total budget. The decreased allocation in administration and incarceration program has enabled a combined increase of 2% in the rehabilitation and social integration program.
Honorable
The latter
Member,
two
your time has now expired.
The ANC supports the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the Honorable Minister of Justice and Correctional Services to respond to the debate, please.
House Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity once again. And colleagues, thank you very much for your positive contribution, by and large, to this debate and for the support that you have offered to this budget allocation, which is most appreciated. And of course, some of the advice that you've given to us will be taken in hand as we seek to improve our correctional system in South Africa. Let me also thank the Deputy Minister, Thabang Makwetla, for his excellent expose of in depicting the kind of prison system that pre-existed democracy, in sharp contrast to the kind of correctional system that we have today, despite the continued challenges of overcrowding and other structural and organizational challenges that we continue to improve upon. And of course, let me also acknowledge the determination of management in ensuring that good governance is restored in the organization, signified, for example, by us achieving an unqualified audit for the first time in this past financial year since 1994, although I must concede that a lot more still needs to be done to improve our compliance with prescripts and the regulatory framework governing us as a department. There are things to celebrate. In the past decade or so, for example, we have since reduced the number of child offenders from our correctional facilities from a whopping 4,126 back in 2003 to a mere 207 this year. This is significant. This demonstrates our commitment to ensuring that prisons are not a place for children. And let me say to Honorable Matthias that I agree with you that we cannot continue to have our correctional facilities filled with young Africans who should be out there engaged in innovative, creative activity that takes our economic objectives forward as a nation, and who end up languishing in our correctional facilities where they put their valuable youthfulness to waste. We need to change the underlying socioeconomic conditions in our society by ensuring that young people have access to quality education, to sorely needed skills that will contribute positively to the development of our economy, and in the process advance what we have committed ourselves as the current government of advancing the ideal of radical economic transformation, so that we begin to remove color, gender, race, disability, and all those unfair attributes that associates our state of socioeconomic inequality or characterize our state of socioeconomic inequality in South Africa. But let me say that whilst I appreciate the positive contribution that Honorable Self, when he led the DA input into this debate earlier on in the debate, I'm beginning to ask myself the question, where did you get Mr. Horn? You're sitting next to each other, but you sound like you come from two different political parties. The same phenomenon is displayed by a Ms. Zille on the one hand, leading a charge to take the DA back to the dark ages of colonialism and apartheid, calling Africans who have chosen the Western Cape to be their home as refugees, and of course, effectively pushing back our efforts as a nation to rid ourselves of racism and colonialism.
Honorable Minister,
I ask
your
myself,
time is now expired.
which DA are we going to be dealing with in the next elections? Is it a DA that
Thank you,
is
Honorable
seeking to
Minister. Your
reintroduce
time is
racism,
expired.
or is it, that's why you're
Thank you.
called an alliance, because you are not a party. You are a mixture of
Thank you,
different
Honorable
ideologies.
Minister. Order. Members are reminded that the debate on the office of the Chief Justice and the Judicial Administration budget vote will take place at 16:15 in the National Assembly chamber, and the debate on the Home Affairs budget vote will take place at the same time in the old Assembly chamber. That concludes the debate and the business of this mini plenary session, and the mini plenary will now rise.